Thank you very much indeed.
Now, the social networking site Twitter says it's increasing the size of its team dealing with users who post abusive and threatening content. Yesterday on Breakfast, former footballer Stan Collymore said the site needed to do more to combat abusive messages after he was targeted by internet trolls.
He is, of course.
I've spoken numerous times to Staffordshire Police, other police forces, who are really banging their heads against a brick wall because they want to do stuff, but Twitter aren't furnishing them with the information. And all it's doing is providing a vacuum for anti-Semitic abuse, racist abuse, homophobic abuse, sexist abuse, anti-disability abuse, and it is quite frankly illegal. Age verification, proper verification tools, proper blocking tools, Twitter need to help.
He is, of course, not the first person to complain about online abuse. In 2012, nearly 5,000 incidences of abuse on the main social media platforms were reported to the police in Britain.
Just over 650 people were charged, but while some people have received fines and prison sentences, there are no official figures for convictions.
So, with 500 million tweets being sent every day, should more be done to police the network? Here to discuss this, the actress Denise Welch, who's been targeted by internet trolls herself, and Vicky Beeching is a theologian who's conducting research into the ethics of the internet and joined us a little bit earlier as well. Denise, you received abuse on Twitter when you came out of the Celebrity Big Brother house. Was that the first time?
Like many people on the television and people not on the television, I do occasionally receive, you know, sort of trollage, and the only really death threat time was when I came out of Big Brother.
You got a death threat?
Yeah, and I mean it's very frightening because although you know these people are anonymous, if you're a mum and you spend a lot of time at home alone with your child, you know you just don't know what's going to happen. So I at that point got in touch with Twitter. They weren't very helpful with me. So because I had threatened to go to the police to this particular troll, I did go to the police. He went away. It didn't really amount to anything very much. But what my take on it is that I don't get anything like the abuse of people like Stan Collymore does. But what I do is that if I do get it, because I'm a Twitter binger, I'm not on it all the time, but I have sort of binges when I'm much more active on it. And, you know, there's some days you're not in the mood, and if someone just decides to call you a vile, disgusting, old and much worse. I just don't see why they should get away with that when they wouldn't in the street. So what I choose to do is to name and shame. And I will go through their timeline, and sometimes you'll go a long way back and there will be a photo of them smiling with a badge on from where they work, which is what happened. And I will name and shame them with a photograph. Once it resulted in someone losing their job, I then get a barrage of tweets from people saying, you're a bully because you've done this, don't you feel guilty someone's lost their job? No, in fact I don't, because if people had seen what he had written to me, he then emailed my husband Lincoln, whose name is on because he's my publicist, whose name is on my Twitter account, and wrote this grovelling letter. Please, 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 Lincoln, please take down the photo. I have a lovely wife at home who doesn't know about my other persona. I go to the pub, nobody knows. Well, they will now. And he said, I take myself off to my shed where I become this evil troll, and it's sort of like a hobby and I can't stop it. So do I feel guilty that he lost his job? I'm afraid I don't.
Can I just ask you at the beginning, you said that you went to the police. Did anything happen?
Yeah, the police got in touch with Twitter, who weren't giving them the right account information. I eventually just said, just leave it. This person's gone away. What they obviously advised to do in the instances like the sort of abuse that I would get is that they say, you know, you've got unfollow and then you've got block. Well, I can do that, but then that's just saying, but that person can then go on to do it to someone else. Some people who are much more vulnerable than me myself. Kevin Healy was tweeting this morning. He's a very active campaigner for autism, he's high up on the spectrum himself. The abuse he receives is absolutely off the scale, and he has received very little help. Twitter have said that in order to prosecute, they have to have something from the United States of America.
They do a subpoena. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's where the thing gets very confusing, doesn't it? Because Twitter is a US company, and when it comes to getting information out of them, they are bound by the regulations that govern them in America. So when they say they're beefing up their own outfit to deal with it, I mean, can you Do you know, is there an office somewhere? How many people are there in there?
It's in London. I'm not sure how many people are there, but they do work very hard, and I think I don't have any affiliations with them, but as somebody who looks at social networks from an academic perspective, I think we need to remember the great good that they actually accomplish. And there are instances where abuse happens. It's happened to me too, and we're not diminishing that, but I think at the same time we also need to think well of these companies because they're actually providing us with an amazing service. And you think about the magnitude of the number of tweets that are sent and the amount that they're dealing with in a fairly small office, I think we do also need to cut them some slack, as well as calling for tighter regulations.
But do you agree that there is still more that they could do? I mean, Stan Collymore was saying about the more regulation when you join, so that they can track.
But it is quite tricky because with anonymity, I mean, that's part of the problem, isn't it? That, like you say, people can tweet from behind a screen, they can get away with it to a degree, and if people clamp down really, really heavily on anonymity, so we have to have strict regulations when we register, we actually lose some of the good anonymity. So if you're a political activist tweeting in an oppressed nation, if you're somebody who's suffering from domestic violence, there are elements of that hiddenness on the internet that can actually be quite empowering for people. And if we clamp down really, really hard, really, really quickly to stop the trolls, we actually throw out the good with the bad. So I think Twitter are probably walking quite a steady path to bring things in as quick as they can, but not rush it, so that actually control is so tight that we lose the good as well as the bad.
What does Twitter do to clamp down on these trolls? Because we hear a lot about people going to the police, and we hear about the police's frustrations with dealing with it. But what evidence is there that Twitter is actually getting involved, sorting people out?
I think obviously they must feel under a great deal of pressure because they're really coming under scrutiny, but they are an American company and they're based in London, so I think there's that kind of element, like you say in your earlier report, that in America the freedom of speech thing is so massive that for an American company they tread even more lightly than we would on freedom of speech and personal expression, so they're kind of dealing with that tension. But I know they really are beefing up the number of people working on the team that oversee the abuse structures. To us it might look like they're not doing enough, but like I said, there are reasons why we don't want to see the internet controlled too heavily too quickly.
Some people, Denise, have suggested that one way of making a point to Twitter would be for people to kind of walk away from it, not do it, not use the service.
Well, Stan Collymore has done that, but then in a way you're sort of giving in to the trolls. Where the grey area for me is that when it's breaking the law, I mean, some of the things that I read on Twitter, not just directed at me but at other people and much, much worse, is that at what point is it breaking the law? We would not be allowed to say those things on television or on radio, but we seem to be allowed to say them on Twitter. I read sometimes quite famous people who are working in television tweeting stuff that it would be a sackable offence were they to say it on, and they're not trolls, but they're saying stuff that they wouldn't be allowed to say to anybody else.
They don't really realise the difference between virtual and physical.
But there is, because whenever any of us in the public eye say anything, you might as well say it on television because the papers can pick it up and have access.
We're going to have to take it there for now. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
We should just say Twitter wouldn't put anyone up to speak to us on breakfast this morning, but we have a statement, and let's read that to you now. Direct, targeted abuse and specific threats of violence, they say, are against our rules. You can let us know if you see abusive tweets by using the report tweet button or through online forms.
It continues. Our trust and safety team works 24 hours a day to respond to reports. We're increasing the size of this team to make our response time even faster.
Let's see, time now exactly 9 o'clock. It's one of the